we reveal 20 true stories from Black families that were never shown on TV in the 1980s.
It was Thursday evening at 8 o'clock. The Johnson family gathered around the television. The Cosby Show was starting. Cliff Huxtable, doctor. Claire Huxtable, lawyer. 5 children, a beautiful home. Problems always solved in 30 minutes. Everyone was smiling on screen. The living room was elegant. The kitchen was spacious and bright. And every episode showed a Black family living the American dream. But when the television turned off, reality began. Marcus Johnson was 16 years old and knew what was happening on the corner. Small plastic bags, handshakes, money changing hands quickly. Crack cocaine had come to the neighborhood in the mid-1980s, and it had changed everything. 2 of Marcus's friends were already using. One had lost his father. The other's mother was using. Marcus saw them every day. Collapsed faces, thin bodies, no meaning left in their eyes. There were no crack houses on The Cosby Show, no addicted mothers, no families losing their homes. But on Marcus's street, 1 in every 3 houses had them. His mother, Diane Johnson, came home tired from house cleaning in the evenings. She left at 6 in the morning, returned at 7 in the evening. She worked in 3 different houses. All were white families' homes, in the suburbs, in houses with large yards. Diane cleaned their toilets, cooked their meals, looked after their children, and then she returned home to take care of her own children. On television, Claire Huxtable was a lawyer. She wore suits, spoke in court. Diane watched her every week and dreamed. But dreaming wasn't enough, because Diane didn't even have a high school diploma. She had gotten pregnant at 16. She had been forced to drop out of school, and now she was 40 years old and still cleaning other people's dirt. Marcus's father wasn't there. He hadn't died. He just wasn't there. He had left when Marcus was 4 years old. He had gone to another city with a new woman. He never came back. He didn't send child support. He didn't call. He didn't visit. Marcus sometimes thought about him, but not too much, because thinking hurt. On The Cosby Show, Cliff Huxtable was always there. He played basketball with his children. He gave them advice. He hugged them. Marcus didn't remember his father's embrace. In the mid-1980s, fathers seemed to be disappearing in the neighborhood. Some were in prison. The Reagan era had toughened drug laws. Sentences for crack were 100 times harsher than sentences for powder cocaine. Crack was in Black neighborhoods. Powder cocaine was in white suburbs. The justice system knew this. Marcus's neighbor, Mr. Williams, had gotten 10 years for carrying 5 grams of crack. The same week, a white kid caught with powder cocaine on television had gotten probation. Marcus didn't understand this, but he felt it, the injustice. At school, teachers no longer cared, or at least they seemed not to. Classes were crowded, books were old, laboratory equipment was broken, sports programs had been cut, art classes had been canceled. The Reagan administration had cut education budgets, and the first places cut were schools that Black children attended. Marcus's English teacher, Mr. Richardson, had once been hopeful. He was young, energetic, thought he would make a difference. But now he was just trying to get through the day. 40 students in one class. Half were hungry. Most had no books at home. Several were homeless. What could Richardson do? On The Cosby Show, children went to private school. Their teachers gave them individual attention. But at Marcus's school, the only attention was staying in class. Keisha was Marcus's sister. She was 14 years old and smart, really smart. Math was easy for her. She loved reading. Her teachers told her, "You could go to college." But how? Diane had no money. Federal aid had been cut. Scholarships had decreased, and Keisha knew most likely she would finish high school, find a job, and help her mother. Maybe in a few years she would get pregnant, just like her mother.
The cycle would continue. On television, the Huxtable daughters went to college, Spelman, Princeton, Howard, but none of Keisha's friends went to college. None. Church was still the gathering place. Sunday mornings, the neighborhood flowed to church. Hats, suits, shiny shoes. Everyone wore their best. Pastor Reverend Thompson preached about hope, about faith, about resilience. The congregation said amen. The gospel choir sang. And for an hour, maybe 2 hours, everything felt good. But after church, reality continued. Crack houses were still on the corner. Unemployment was still 40%. Gangs still fought for territory. Because gangs had grown in the 1980s. Crips, Bloods, Folk Nation, People Nation. From Los Angeles to Chicago, from Detroit to New York, young men joined because they couldn't belong anywhere else. Families had fallen apart. There were no jobs. Schools didn't care. But gangs cared. Gangs gave protection. They gave a sense of belonging and money. Drug dealing was the economy of the 1980s. It was the biggest employer for black neighborhoods. Marcus knew this. His friends told him to join. Fast money, brother. You can pay your mother's bills. You can give Keisha money for school. You'll respect yourself. Marcus thought. He thought for a long time. And then he said no. Why? Because his mother looked at him every day and said, "You're better. You're better than these streets." Marcus didn't believe it, but he said no for his mother. But many children didn't say no, and the result was blood. By the end of the 1980s, black neighborhoods resembled war zones. Bullets flew randomly. Children died in crossfire. Mothers held funerals again and again. By the time Marcus was 16, he had seen 3 funerals. All were friends. One was 15 years old. Another was 17. The third was only 14. On television, the Huxtables didn't see funerals. They watched comedy, ate family dinners, solved problems with laughter. But in Marcus's world, there was no solution. There was only survival.
HIV/AIDS came quietly. No one talked about it. Because AIDS was their disease. Homosexuals, white peoples, coastal cities. But the truth was, AIDS was also coming to black neighborhoods. Shared needles, unsafe sex, lack of information. By 1985, 3 people on Marcus's street had died. Not officially from AIDS, because families were ashamed. Doctors made vague diagnoses, but everyone knew. Marcus once asked his mother, "What is AIDS?" Diane looked away. "A bad thing. Stay away." Sex education had been cut at school. Conservative lobbies had pressured. The church wouldn't talk about condoms, and the media showed AIDS only with white victims. Black communities were left in the dark, and the virus spread. Unemployment destroyed black men in the 1980s. Factories closed. Industrial jobs disappeared. Reagan's economy gave tax cuts to the wealthy, but didn't invest in poor neighborhoods. Marcus's Uncle Eddie once worked at an automotive factory. Good salary, union protection, health insurance. Then the factory closed. It moved to Mexico. Eddie was unemployed. He was 45 years old. He had 2 children. He had mortgage payments. He started looking for work, but no place hired him. "You're old. You're overqualified. You're not suitable." Eddie lost his house 6 months later. He lost his family. His wife took the children and left. Eddie was now staying at the shelter. He was drinking, and Marcus saw him every day, a man who was once strong, now broken. On television, Cliff Huxtable was a doctor. He had a solid job. Men like Eddie weren't on television. Eviction notices were common. Red papers were stuck to doors. You will be evicted within 15 days. Families put their belongings on the street. Children sat on sidewalks, their toys and clothes beside them. Sometimes the church helped. Sometimes relatives took them in. But most of the time, families went to shelters, or lived in their cars, or disappeared. Marcus's classmate Jamal disappeared. One day at school, the next day gone. The teacher didn't ask where he was. No one asked, because everyone knew. They had been evicted, and they hadn't come back to the neighborhood. Fast food restaurants became the only source of employment. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. Minimum wage jobs. No benefits, no union, but a job was a job. Diane's sister Sharon worked at Burger King. $3.35 an hour. 30 hours a week, because full-time employees would get insurance, and the company didn't want that. Sharon would stand, smile, serve customers, and return home smelling fried oil and sweat. On television, Claire Huxtable wore elegant suits, worked in an office, was respected. Sharon got none of that. Police were seen as a threat, not as a protector, because in the 1980s, the war on drugs changed the police. Military tactics, SWAT teams, no-knock raids. Black neighborhoods were targeted. Stop and frisk was widespread. Marcus was stopped for the first time at 13 years old. He was walking with friends. A police car stopped. Stop, hands up, against the wall. Marcus hadn't done anything, but that didn't matter. He was searched, questioned, threatened. "I'll see you here again. I'll take you in." Marcus was 13 years old, and from that moment on, when he saw police, he was afraid. On television, police were good, helpful, but in Marcus's neighborhood, police were the enemy. Community programs were cut. Youth centers closed. After-school programs were canceled. The Reagan administration cut social spending and increased military spending. The priorities were clear. Marcus once went to a basketball program. It was free. The coaches were good, the friends were fun. But in 1984, the program closed. Funding was cut. The building was sold, and Marcus had nowhere to go. He went home, and the streets waited. But there was also resistance. There always was, because black communities never gave up. In the neighborhood, Mrs. Davis served free breakfast every Saturday, at her house, in her kitchen. 10 or 15 children would come. Eggs, bread, fruit juice. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mrs. Davis paid from her own money because she knew the children were hungry and no one was feeding them. Aid programs weren't shown on television. Mrs. Davis was never in the news, but the neighborhood knew, and the neighborhood came. The church still organized clothing drives, food banks, homework help. Pastor Thompson gathered young men, talked with them, offered alternatives. Every week he lost a few, to gangs, to drugs, to violence, but he saved a few, and those few mattered. The Cosby Show didn't show community activism. It didn't show the struggle. It only showed success. But real success was waking up every day and continuing. Marcus's mother, Diane, never complained, at least not out loud. At home, at night, when she was alone, sometimes she cried. Marcus heard, but he never said anything, because he knew his mother had to stay strong, and she stayed strong. Every morning she got up, she worked, she came home, she made dinner, she sent her children to school, she paid her bills, and she survived. On The Cosby Show, Claire Huxtable was strong, but Diane was stronger, because Diane wasn't a character, she was real. In 1989, Marcus finished high school. He got his diploma. It was a miracle. Most of his friends didn't finish. Some were in prison. Some had died. But Marcus was alive, and he had his diploma. At the graduation ceremony, his mother sat in the front row. She cried, tears of pride. When Marcus went up on stage, when he received his diploma, he looked at his mother, and he never forgot that moment, because that moment wasn't on television. It was in real life, and in real life, victories were harder but more valuable.
The Cosby Show ended in 1992. 8 seasons, 201 episodes. Millions of people watched, and many people thought it was a true representation of black life. But it wasn't. It was a fantasy land. Beautiful, entertaining, comforting, but not real. Real black families lived through the crack epidemic in the 1980s, through HIV/AIDS, through mass incarceration, through unemployment, through homelessness, through education cuts, through police violence, and the media showed none of this because it was uncomfortable, because it wouldn't sell, because people didn't want to see uncomfortable truths. But those truths were there. Mothers like Diane Johnson, children like Marcus, men like Eddie, neighbors like Mrs. Davis, leaders like Pastor Thompson. They survived, they struggled, and they won. Victory wasn't a destination. Victory was a process, waking up every day and continuing to try. Today, Marcus is past 40 years old. He has children. He has a job. It's not perfect, but he's alive. And he tells his children about the 1980s, how hard it was, how painful it was, but also how strong they were because they survived. And that survival was never shown on television, but it was the most important story because it was real.